it's Ian Forrest here again with my 11th video. The previous ones have presented purposely fragmented snapshots for different parts of my history, which have been recounted significantly in the last two books of my autobiographical trilogy. This video has been formed on a very important day in UK history, and its contents reach an almost climactic exposure of wrongdoing and injustice. But these have not just been experiences told for self-centered indulgency and complaint. No, indeed. I hope you'll appreciate that not only am I a dissident whistleblower, deserving of extinction according to my enemies, but someone who is laying before you situations which are both extremely immoral, evil, and destructive to our nation, let alone other victims who have suffered alongside me. In other words, important to us all. So in this video, I'm going to have a condensed recap on some of the salient features. Firstly, there would have been no cause for this exposure of corruption had I received my and our rights and rightful justice when I returned from France 25 years ago. Armed with bulging proof of criminality by the banks and lower judicial system, I entered the world of the higher judiciary, simply wanting financial restitution and justice against wrongdoers. But you know, it wasn't just a lot of crooked people that I encountered. Behind them was a cleverly contrived system of so-called legal administration which provided them with not just their required self-protection, but one which supplied them with unfettered, unaccountable power, much of which is used to cheat the ordinary citizen. So let me recount some of those features I have reported. Okay. The two separate jurisdictions allow manipulation not just on outcome, but to squash presented criminality to the courts. Therefrom, not least the banks, their employees, the judicial system, most of the UK elite and other chosen untouchables are granted immunity and impunity from serious offences. As much as possible, their bywords are secrecy and secret dealings. With those in mind, the chicanery against justice and fairness is easy to exercise. For instance, the Memorandum of Understanding between the police and the judicial system allows secret decisions to be made. Who will even be charged with their crimes? Selection and conspiracy are easily achieved behind closed doors. This contrived manoeuvring is built into the wide judicial system, where all the players, solicitors, barristers, judiciary, official receivers and a few more, are officers of the court, ostensibly owing their allegiance only to the Queen, but in practice very much to themselves. This nice little arrangement no less produces the means by which the rich, powerful and influential can rely upon the broad judicial system to win financially and be granted impunity. This yields the new two-tier class system, which no less increases the divide between the rich and the poor. Of course, it also means that innocent victims are robbed by that band of untouchables and unable to get restitution and justice through cheating protection and, not least, the ability even to get access to justice, to which I will refer below. And don't forget, a victim faces not just twisting justice, but enemies who are financed by the rich and the state, who make sure through legislation that, for instance, a litigant in person cannot receive a penny of costs in his or her fight. Which brings me to something fundamental in all this, namely equality, or rather lack of it, which I will mention again before I close. Of course, unpunished dishonesty is rife and even encouraged. I have found it almost to be a language of the civil courts. There is much more, of course, and I am being encouraged to write a fourth book to include that. But I'm sure from what I've just said, you will see that the judicial manipulation of their system and daily decisions throughout the country means that millions of us cannot get a fair and impartial hearing, as under Article 6 of the ECHR, and Human Rights Act for that matter. Amazingly, all those features and much more are enabled against us UK citizens by supine politicians acceding to the requirements of the judicial system, giving the judiciary more powers at every turn, colluding even with them to destroy complainants and whistleblowers like me. And never a word of criticism or correction which would help innocent UK victims of oppression and suppression. On that score, I have set out a summary of the treatment meted out to me in my video 8. But more widely, an issue from that is the question of truth. In the last book of my trilogy, I have set out small annex theses, which include the indivisibility of truth. The same should be applied to law, justice, honesty, and so on. But just on one aspect, for instance, in the contrived and false division of jurisdictions in the UK, the law should be upheld in all courts. But as you have seen, this is not so. This is just one barrier to justice, which has been carefully moulded to suit the judicial system. This brings me to one of the most important aspects of my history and the general situation affecting all of us UK indigenous citizens. You will have seen that I have met hundreds of crooked people in that system over the last 25 years. I have been one of many complaining about the injustice, dishonesty, and oppression. Politicians profess that they cannot interfere due to the supposed impartiality of the judiciary. This video is made at the beginning of 2015, the centenary year of the Magna Carta, habeas corpus, and all that. Please see my video 8. But also, I am finalising this on the very day of the 50th anniversary of Winston Churchill's funeral. It was he, you will recall, who brought into being the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which begat the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Charter of Human Rights. Let me quote from the preamble of that Universal Declaration. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind and the advent of a world in which human beings still enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want, has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. I bring to your attention some features of the Declaration's articles, namely, essentials of equality, lack of discrimination, no one shall be subject to torture or arbitrary arrest, and much else, which leads to the Article 6 of the ECHR. In the determination of his civil rights and obligations or of any criminal charge against him, everyone is entitled to a fair public hearing within a reasonable time by an independent and impartial tribunal established by law. Then look at Article 17. Nothing in this convention may be interpreted as implying for any state, group or person any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein, or at their limitation to a greater extent than is provided for in the Convention. Those constitute our highest constitutional law and ride above anything else. Or do they? Now, so far, so good. Public bodies, including the judicial system, are required to respect all features of the constitutional human rights legislation. It then progresses for our protection to our rights being respected by fair and impartial hearings and all trials. This denotes, does it not, fairness, impartiality, respect, honesty, and a whole host of essential features. So what happens? The socialist Labour government, through the natural desire to control and work in secrecy, then conceives the Human Rights Act 1998 in cahoots with the judiciary, pretending that it is a reflection of the previous constitutional law. Oh, in most ways it does, but with one devious addition. Namely, from Article 3 to 10, it is the judiciary who hold the sole empowerment of our rights and even deciders of offences and abuse thereto, when of course they are the largest perpetrators thereof. It is like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. They also purposely omitted Article 13 of the ECHR, which says, "Everyone whose rights and freedoms are set forth in this convention are violated shall have effective remedy before a national authority," doesn't say courts, "notwithstanding that the violation has been committed by persons acting in an official capacity." Are you surprised? Towards the end of my 25 years, time and again I have pointed out the offences and abuse against my human rights. In addition to the criminality and so on, and my applications have been battered away through silence and obstruction. But in practice, the climb through the courts normally is thick with obstruction, unfairness, often insurmountable financial hurdles and unlawfulness. I have already described the self-contained mafia of the judicial system, as I call it, devoted to self-interest and greed. The greatest percentage by far of litigants employ solicitors and barristers at vast expense, if they can afford it. Again, I have already described the predestined progress of that course of action through the courts, and of course they are steered away from a whole range of options which would expose the wider judicial system. Alternatively, the litigant in person really does not stand a chance, especially up against an opposition using favoured solicitors and barristers manipulating the system in league with the judiciary. You see, when there is dissatisfaction with a judge's order, one should be able to appeal easily. But no, one has to get the permission of the offending judge to move forward. What sort of justice is that? But as you struggle to overcome that, the higher court is more determined to squash your efforts, at much larger expense, of course. But even then, they have a nice device where one has to apply for permission to appeal, let alone the appeal itself, if granted, which is unusual. So when it comes to seeking justice over one's human rights through the courts, you can imagine what happens. Silence, appeals refused from the lower courts, entries to the higher ones refused because of that lack of permission, and in the background, an escalation of financial demands when moving up the courts. For instance, years ago, when I was refused entry into the House of Lords twice and once in the Supreme Court, the security cost required up front was £25,000, alongside enormous fees, of course. That aside, my applications were refused by some junior gatekeeper. Exposure of the judicial system is bad for their image, you see, and would affect their massive income, not least from abroad. Maybe that is why the politicians are happy to have life as it is. All that goes against the spirit and intent of the original constitutional laws, which surely must demand easy, free and effective access to the courts, justice and resolution. Yet, our politicians have handed the judicial system an easy way to destroy our rights and protect their abuse and offences against us, at the same time committing a whole range of other offences to cheat us. And now, for a proposed Bill of Rights, who are the politicians consulting? Yes, you guessed it. Since the effectiveness of the HRA 1998, i.e. 17 years ago, have you ever heard of an actual court case under Article 6 of the ECHR? Yet the grounds for and the need is happening all over the country every day at all levels. My answer to this situation can be seen in my video 10. But it is Parliament's duty to protect UK citizens, our human rights and civil liberties, and yet they are relying upon the judicial system foremost for those. Churchill's aspirations for us have been hijacked for denial, abuse and cheating by the very people charged with their responsibility. Just as third world dictators deny their citizens their rights, so this is happening right here. Its effects are cleverly hidden because the right for our rights is never published or even exposed. The press, politicians, and many others are suppressed through fear, bribery, or complicity. I maintain that offences and abuse against our human rights and civil liberties should be criminal offences. Perhaps some politicians will move this forward, as well as rectifying the position described herein. It is they who have taken away our Churchill's birthright. They have betrayed and dishonoured that legacy and heritage, leaving us defenceless against what I have shown to be an almighty tyranny of injustice. Tyranny? Remember that word? It was against that the Magna Carta was created, to deliver justice to us. Now, 800 years on, it is back with a vengeance, which links me to say that not surprisingly, I have a legal fatwa out against me, and I will explain the effects of this in my next video. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye for now.